My name is Emma Merrigan, and I use she, her pronouns. This is the second part of the series Accessible Affinity Programming, created by the Center for Diversity and Inclusion at Washington University in St. Louis. In this video, we'll cover some best practices for program design, starting with the language that you use when conceptualizing, planning, and promoting your affinity programming. So let's get started. As you're preparing your event or events, you will likely be thinking about your target audience and how to appeal to their interests with both publicity and objectives. Whether or not you specifically target your events to disabled communities, it is important to use positive imagery and language around those communities. In other words, to avoid stigmatizing or ableist messages as much as possible. A good place to start is to think about whether to use person first or identity first language for your event. For those of you unfamiliar with these terms, person first language means stating someone's personhood before their disability and has the intention to emphasize their humanity and combat disability stigma. Some examples of person first language would be people with disabilities, or so-and-so has cerebral palsy. Again, the focus here is to emphasize that disability is just one part of a person's complex identity and not the sole defining factor of their existence. However, some folks prefer identity first language, which names the disability first and often implies that the person or group considers that disability a core part of who they are and how they relate to the world. Some examples of common identity first language are deaf people, autistic community, or so-and-so is disabled. Those who use identity first language tend to consider it a more affirming option since it doesn't downplay their disability in order to highlight their personhood. However, there is no one right answer about what language you should use, and the choice may depend on the type of disability or community you're communicating with. It's also important to keep in mind that some folks, like many deaf individuals and communities, don't identify with terms like disability or disabled at all. In any case, before you reach out to potential presenters or audience members, do some research to find out if there's any words or phrases you should stick to or stay away from in these conversations. It also doesn't hurt to respectfully ask people what language they prefer, since identifiers of course vary from person to person. Earlier, I mentioned avoid stigmatizing or ableist language, which can include a wide variety of descriptors. Just a warning to folks, this current slide contains some examples of this language in relation to programming, planning, and publicity. Generally, avoiding ableist language means acknowledging that disabled folks are a heterogeneous population, not a monolith. Contrary to a common misunderstanding, disabilities are not universally bad or a problem that needs to be cured, though disabilities can come with negative aspects, from chronic pain to just having to navigate through ableist society. Here I've included a few common but harmful messages to avoid, like telling people they need a cure, aren't normal, or using disability as a metaphor for ignorance, or even something good, like saying something is crazy or insane. Other harmful practices include not letting people use necessary aids at your programs and having mask optional policies, which can give the impression that your institution or office values disabled and immunocompromised folks' lives and safety less than other people's choices to wear a mask. To counter such implications, consider providing PPE gear and implementing programs that let people engage in styles of communication, movement, and learning that feel safe and generative for them. On the other side of the disability stigmatizing coin, you should be equally careful to stay away from seemingly positive language that carries patronizing tones. Disabled people are not helpless, but they are also not simply inspiring by virtue of existing with a disability. Whether you minimize or over-exaggerate someone's accomplishments just because they have a disability, it can come across as a fundamental lack of understanding of their lived reality. So can euphemisms like differently abled or handy-capable, which still indirectly imply that being disabled is a negative thing. While interacting with speakers or stakeholders and creating publicity campaigns, you'll want to strike a balance between acknowledging and honoring the differences in disabled folks' lived experience on the one hand, and recognizing the capacities, knowledge, and value that they can bring to any community on the other. Instead of assuming someone can't do something, ask how they can or how you can help them. Instead of assuming that everyone should have certain capacities to be successful, look for what assets, capacities, knowledge, or joy they can bring to the space, many times as a result of their disability. If you'd like to find out more or contribute to the conversation about accessibility, disability, and affinity programming, email WashU's CDI at diversityandinclusion@wustl.edu, or send us a message on Facebook or Instagram at WUSTL CDI. Thank you for joining us.